Is negativity really that bad for me? Oh, yes, it is. Stay tuned. I'm going to tell you why. Is negative thinking really all that bad for you? Well, actually, yes, it is. And today I'm going to break down why it's so bad for you. Number one, when we are stuck in a negative thinking pattern or are behaving or thinking negatively, what happens is we're going to have a down regulation of our prefrontal cortex and an upregulation of the limbic system, specifically the amygdala. Now, remember that prefrontal cortex, that is where empathy and altruism hang out, but it's also where we process right and wrong, where we think before we act, where we make good decisions. So that part of our brain is going to downregulate while that limbic system, the amygdala, is going to upregulate. And in the amygdala, now we're going to have an increase in depression and anxiety, but it's also going to trigger a release of cortisol. Now, cortisol is a really good thing in an emergency, but chronic cortisol levels or cortisol levels that are too high are really bad for both your brain and your body over time. That's a whole nother video series. But what cortisol does is it activates that fight and flight response. Well, if you're in fight and flight mode with somebody and your prefrontal cortex, where empathy and altruism hang out, is downregulated, you're not going to make the best decisions. And over time, you do that long enough, over time, what happens is that with that downregulation of the prefrontal cortex, you start to lose some of your cognitive control. This leads me to number two. With that downregulation in the prefrontal cortex, that upregulation in the amygdala, you will also get a decrease in activity in the learning and memory centers of the brain, and it will make it more difficult for you to remember things or to learn new things. You also have a downregulation or a decrease in activity in the cerebellum. Over a long period of time, that can actually create confusion and, in extreme cases, lack of coordination. That brings us to number three. Because of that increase in amygdala activity, what will happen is over time, and it doesn't take a long period of time, you become more emotionally unstable. So you might become more reactive. You might be more prone to mood swings or more irritable. But also, because of that increase in cortisol, you start to have some health outcomes. You might gain weight. You might not be able to lose weight that you don't want. You also have other things that happen in the body, like it suppresses your immune system. You might get sick more often. And cortisol is linked to shorter telomeres. Now, I want to give a really simple explanation to what telomeres are, but think of them as an aglet on the end of a shoelace, right? That little plastic cap at the end of the shoelace keeps the shoelace from unraveling. A telomere is like an aglet for your DNA. It keeps the DNA from unraveling. Well, because cortisol actually is correlated with shorter telomere length, because of that, the DNA then becomes more vulnerable to things like disease, increasing our risk for all kinds of disease, including all forms of cancer. So, the next thing is that a person, they stay in that, they develop what's called negativity bias. And that means every new piece of stimuli that comes into their life, every new piece of information that they encounter, they will interpret it through that negative bias that has been created in that neural circuitry in the limbic system. That is because of the next thing, and that is that those thought patterns become a habit. So we call this the Hebbian principle that neurons that fire together wire together, meaning the more you think that way, the more that neural pathway wires together, and you start to form a neural superhighway. And so you go from one negative thought to another faster and faster and faster each time. And finally, negativity, especially over time, is correlated with, because of the changes in the brain, with a much higher risk of all mental health, poor mental health outcomes, and a much increased risk for dementia. So, what do you do about it? Well, you can't just suppress negative thoughts. We know that when you try to just like, something's terrible and you're just like, I'm just not going to think about it. What we know is that actually gives those thoughts more power. So, you want to acknowledge what you're thinking. Yes, I'm feeling that that was disappointing. Yes, I'm discouraged that that turned out that way. Yes, that really hurt my heart. So, label the feeling and put it out there and then focus on gratitude. One of the clients I had very early on in my career was an older man, and he had been stricken with a very rare disease early in his life. And although he had lived a lot longer than doctors thought he would, he was stricken with horrible, horrible pain, crippling pain. And I would just marvel at him because he'd say, yes, my feet really, really hurt, but I'm grateful I can still stand. Yes, yes, my back really, really hurts, but I am so grateful I can still walk. Gratitude in the brain does the exact opposite of negative thinking. All of those things I just told you about negative thinking, gratitude, thanksgiving focuses on exactly, it does the exact opposite in the brain. So the next time you're feeling negative, figure out how you can label it and then turn it into a praise or something to be grateful for. I will also link my video to the spiritual disciplines for mental health down below, because there I also talk a little bit about the science of Thanksgiving and why that's good for our brain. I hope this has been helpful for you, and until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you.